Aloha and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Got Your Six podcast. This six-question podcast brings together high performers to share their methods, strategies, and ideas, delivered in an informative and, most importantly, actionable way that'll help you lead yourself and those around you from the battlefield to the boardroom. Coming to you every episode, I'm your host, Tony Nash. And into the breach.
Nothing mentioned on this podcast is an endorsement or opinion of the Department of Defense.
I got your six, we got your back. Got your six, we got your back. Got your six, we got your back. I got your six.
What an incredible treat we have today. A dear friend of mine is finally here. I've been looking forward to this episode since the inception of the podcast. Frankie Margotta, strategist, creative thinker over at Siegel+Gale. I'm just excited to just deep dive into your mind, my man. Thank you so much for being here, Frankie.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, man. I feel like everyone's going to be really hyped up after that intro, and I don't know that I've earned it, but I'll try to deliver. Absolutely.
I'm under delivering right now, so buckle up. Frankie, you've been all over the world with your time in service, being a SOCOM vet. But being a brand strategist is a very different role than being in the military, but it isn't. Where do you implement at least one thing on the daily from your time in the military in your current role and what you're doing over at Siegel+Gale?
That's a great question. And I think that's an important insight that there are, and I found this a lot with military experience. There are parallels. Sometimes you have to dig and do what I like to call skill abstraction, which we can talk about after if you want. But I think I think something for me is definitely positioning, right? I do a lot of positioning as a strategist, especially for brand. Same way you would think about positioning an element on the battlefield or, wherever in a training exercise, wherever it's going to be, right? But you're taking in the entire battlefield geometry. You're thinking about the landscape, and it's dynamic. It's always changing and things are shifting. And you have yourself to think about, maybe your greater unit, maybe partner force units. You definitely have an enemy or a hostile, something like that. And all these things come together. And it's very similar in brand. You have this brand and you have a market. Where is it going to sit in the market? And as all these things shift, where is there a place that we can really dig in and build something we can own versus just taking up space that isn't really ours? You want to establish something that you can fortify.
Absolutely. And how do you do that daily, looking into that skill extraction like you talked about?
Well, in the beginning, it was definitely a challenge, right? How do I translate these things that I know? Because you inevitably you put together a lot through experience, because that's one thing the military gives you is experience across the world, different cultures. You can, if you're looking for it, gain a lot of empathy and take some of those core foundational principles that you learn throughout whatever your skill set's going to be and apply those, right? And then when you zoom out and you think about, okay, let's take the title off this. Like, what am I actually doing? What is this thing that I'm doing? And does this apply now to a different field? Or if it does, what do they call it? So when you look at the actual function or the skill in a practical way, or maybe even theoretical, which was in my case, what is the theory that I'm applying and that I taught for 3 years? I taught positioning essentially. How does this now apply? And every day, thinking about a brand, you have, what does it stand for? And there's going to be a profit, right? And a product. So everyone wants to make money. We know that's probably a constant, right? For the most part, not always, very few absolutes. And they're going to have a product of some kind or a service, right? And if you have a good product or service, that's probably an indicator that other people will have other things like your product or service. So we think about positioning in the market, how are we going to, articulate the value, differentiate ours from other things that look like it, so on and so forth. So when you consider those things, it becomes the same but different. You have to, okay, where do we want to sit down, for lack of a better term? Where do we want to place this brand or this product or what have you, in relation to all the other things that are happening? So your competition, right? What is your competition doing, and what are they talking about, and what is their purpose and and all these other things, right? And it's kind of like, okay, this is like your enemy, and that's so dramatic, and that's not like really what I'm trying to say. But okay, this is the thing that's going to stop you from getting what you want, which is, maybe that's domination on the battlefield, or maybe that's going to be, now I want to sell a bunch of this product, or we want to scale up, or whatever that's going to be, right? But something that's going to inhibit you from getting where you want to go. And then there's other factors, right? There's, I don't know, terrain that you have to deal with. There's maybe civilian considerations like ROEs, all these other things that play into your calculus on the battlefield. And it's the same in the market with a brand and a business. There's going to be inevitably a variety of variables that are going to come up that you're going to have to consider. And you make the best decision that you can, but ownership is important. Like you have to position a brand where they can truly own the space and back up the claims.
And talking about that ownership, right, that accountability, through taking in the different variables that are in play throughout the operational environment, really leads to something I think critical, is understanding what is key to you, not key to everyone else. But there's that shared, you have to understand where you can kind of set and root yourself, your brand, your business, before you can really kind of go and reach out to anybody else. Because if you're just trying to like go and land grab or seize key terrain, see things that look great to everyone else, you're just going to keep chasing. Where did that come from? To be able to dive and understand that theory, where did you pick that up? Is it like a book, an instructor kind of came along, a mission you were running? Where do you think that came from?
In the military, it was through application. It was through the nature of the job that I held, and I ended up teaching. I was a cadre member for about 3.5 years, and that was a big part of what I taught, was positioning on the battlefield, for lack of a better term. And I didn't know that was a professional career track, and it's not, right? Being a strategist is inherently more things than that, but that is very applicable to brand. And when I found the parallels, that is when I got excited. And it really wasn't apparent. It was something I more or less stumbled across.
Do you remember that moment when you stumbled across it?
Yes.
Please.
Okay, yeah. I was looking to transition from the military. I'd got back from a long deployment. It's a little weird when you transition at home. There's always like a break-in period of like trying to remember what drawer socks are going to go in, and like what your kids want for breakfast, and all those things that you miss that you kind of take for granted. And it just stayed weird. So I had a conversation with my wife, and we basically both decided on like, okay, this like maybe it's not going to be a 20+ year thing. This is, maybe I have to start looking to other things, right? So I didn't know really what I wanted to do. I was always creative, so I looked into kind of like creative space. So fast forwarding a little bit, I talked to some people in the industry, started to go to school, and I was just hungry for whatever I could find. So I was reading books, I was volunteering, I would like buy someone coffee if they'd give me 30 minutes, something like that, so I could just try to put together my own like heat map of like what's out there and like where I want to go. And then during a volunteer event here in San Diego, I met someone who was a strategist at a strategic consultancy on the East Coast. And we were putting in probably like 16-hour days, just because the premise of what this nonprofit did was over the course of 72 hours, and they still do it, and they're an awesome organization. They rebrand a nonprofit. They pull together all the creative talent that wants to volunteer in a given area. So San Diego, New York, Richmond, wherever it's going to be. And you get together over a weekend and you do something really good for a company in need. And during that time, we were working these long hours, and I was just full of questions and just asked for it. It's like, do you mind like spending some time with me? I have some questions, whatever. And we ended up going over some work that he had done prior, some case studies, and I was enamored. I was enamored with the word. I was like, what is this called? How do I do it? Like, what if I want to do this thing? How do I do it? And he was just a great influence on me. He still talk this day. We have a call like every 2 weeks, and there were other people along the way as well. But that is what pretty much happened, and that's when I realized like strategist is a role, strategy is a track, and it definitely fit what I was looking to do.
Now, being a strategist, like you mentioned, right, you have to be a generalist, really knowledgeable in a lot of areas, and then understanding where to find specific information to, solve a problem. And knowing how inquisitive you are, what skill are you currently working on that, like, you're a complete novice and you're just trying to, take as much information in as possible?
I would say, not that I'm a novice, but storytelling is something that I'm really leaning into. Like how, because when you think about strategy, and strategy, I'll just make a distinction. Generalist is perfect, like, because you do need to know a lot, but within like the actual field of strategy, you can be a brand strategist, you can be an experienced strategist, you can be a product strategist. Like there's tons of different like little micro niches, maybe not even micro, that might be a misrepresentation, but there's a lot that you can kind of dive down a little deeper into. But in any of those, you're right. You do need to have a little bit of a generalist approach. And I know some really good strategists that just, they do a lot, and that's it's serving them. But back to the storytelling, when you think about strategy, it's an opinion. At the end of the day, it's what you or a collective group thinks. So words and the ability to articulate the idea in a really compelling way, not to mislead, not to be underhanded, but to really truly convey like the full breadth of the idea, like, is so important. The strategy could be phenomenal, and if you articulate it wrong, like it won't see the light of day, right? And then the other side of that coin is making it actionable. So how do you create a strategy that then can be actioned, because you don't want it to die on the shelf, right? And you want it to be used, and you want it to do some good.
So where in storytelling do you feel that you're really trying to, is it that actionable piece?
No, I think just overall, like, how do I tell better, more compelling, more insightful stories, right? Because you have all this information, these inputs, let's say, from doing research, from doing interviews, and everyone has a perspective. But now, what is the so what behind that, right? And how do I deliver that to you in a way that's digestible and compelling? Like, that to me is the role of telling this story and bringing someone through a narrative, right? Like, if you're briefing everyone up, before a mission, hey, check it out. This is like what we're out here to do. And in order to do this thing, you're going to go here, we're going to do that. And as we do that, this is probably going to happen, right? But you're kind of walking everyone through your rationale, your logic in a like timeline order, right? So it's like somewhat a story. And it's no different on the civilians. I mean, it's different in the way that I think there's a little more art to it. Whereas in the military, you're definitely not trying to be too poetic, and that's not to say you are in design or branding, but I don't think, I guess what I'm saying is, in the military, I don't think we're super conscious of storytelling. I think we're just conscious of getting information across.
In understanding that side of storytelling, where it's clear and concise, but in a way that's captivating, right? I think, like you said, when you're briefing a mission or receiving a mission, you're bought in at that point. You're there. You need to get the information in order to then execute and action, whatever that is. When it comes to storytelling in the civilian side, please correct me if I'm wrong, you don't really have people bought in yet. So you're trying to do both things simultaneously. Would you say that, and trying to understand that compelling storytelling, has greatly enhanced your life as a brand strategist, or is there something else, like, say, in the last 5 years that has really greatly influenced your life and impacted in ways that you wouldn't have imagined 5 years ago?
Yes, I would say storytelling, yes, is definitely a big part in like how you use your words, for sure. And I would say probably a better analogy maybe is like sending a con op up, right? That you don't have the mission at that point. You're trying to vie for the mission. So in order to make a compelling case to your superiors or whoever owns that battle space, yes, we want to do this. We're going to be doing it safely. You know, it's not going to take more than this time. If it does, we have this plan, that kind of stuff, even though there's like a little logic in there, but like telling the story. And then, yeah, I think storytelling is, at least right now, I'm focused on it. So I think it's like heightened my senses to it. But I'll keep thinking on that in the back of my mind as far as, is there something else that really was impactful that maybe I'm glossing over right now?
And once you start to look for storytelling, right, you tend to see it everywhere. It's like one of those things, you know, It's a psychological thing. I forget what it's called. When you see one thing that, you know, you're looking for, trying to understand, you start to see it everywhere. So I can only imagine seeing it through your eyes, how they're just kind of like wide open as you're taking in all this information and processing it with that different lens of, all right, how do you reverse engineer the storytelling and make it compelling and not, you know, not just existing.
Yeah. Nailed it.
Hey, I'm just following your lead, my man. And when it comes to storytelling, though, not every story is going to hit, just like with, you know, a comedian, and not every mission is going to be successful. There's failures along the way. Mm-hmm. What failure has ultimately led to a great success, whether civilian, military, both? I'd love to hear more.
Yeah. So my transition from the military, I extended my contract just so I'd have some time to figure out what my next move was going to be. So I had a plan, and I went to, let's call it like one company, and I thought that was going to be it, where I was going to be. And I put time there, and it's like, this is good. Well, there ended up being, it just didn't really fit for me. And I decided, you know, after long deliberation, like to walk away from that. But in doing so, it was like I had nothing. So essentially I was stuck to freelance and see if something worked out. And that I would consider like a failure in the plan, but ultimately was still able, you know, I freelanced a little bit, got a position somewhere else, and then ended up moving over to Siegel+Gale, which never would have happened. I mean, I can't say never, but likely would not have happened had I stayed at the other company that I intended to, because it was just a different type of work. So ultimately I stuck to what my gut was telling me in the moment, like not just about, is this the smart play, but like, will you really be fulfilled doing this? And there's nothing wrong with that company or what they're doing. They do great work. It just was not in alignment with what I was looking to do. But looking back today, that was such a good thing. It was such a great thing. It forced me to grow in the moment. It forced me to expand my horizon and see what else was out there. And it didn't lock me up.
And understanding that intuition that does exist in all of us, and listening to a voice, a hunch, whatever you want to call it, where it says, hey, let's bet on us, right? This is a great program, great institution, great organization. But it's not what we need to find fulfillment. We need to go bet on ourselves. And that's what you did. And I think that's a huge message in the moment where it feels kind of, ambiguous. There's chaos, there's confusion. That voice is there. You just got to kind of listen for it and take that tactical pause. That's what it sounds like you did.
Absolutely. And I always bet on myself. You know what I mean? Like when the game is on the line and it's the championship, like I want the ball, right? I think a lot of us do. In the moment, it wasn't without deep, like consideration, working through all the contingencies, knowing that like not only me, but my family, right? At this point, like, am I being reckless? Am I being irresponsible because I have a family? And now I'm sort of walking away from something in hopes of getting something better, right? And there's a lot of calculus that went into that. But ultimately, I think it's true of a lot of military members that there is an underlying tenacity there that, you will work through it. You're no stranger to adversity, and you're used to people coming along and breaking your stuff, right? And you're good at pretty much making a pivot when you need to. That being said, tenacity too much it's something I've also had to throttle back on. And I think that's important because some of the, that mindset of just like, I'm never going to quit, like I'm going to bust through every wall, that works in combat, that works, in certain scenarios, but it can be very toxic, on a civilian sector. And especially when you need to take a knee, when pain means something's wrong and it doesn't mean you're just uncomfortable, right? Like those are the times where I would argue that maybe we need to break away from that a little bit and listen to our bodies, our minds, etc., and not just push through, because it could be, just as bad.
That's an absolute great point. And Frankie, before we go, I got one last question for you.
Yeah.
How are you better today than yesterday?
How am I better today than yesterday? You know what? I'm better today than yesterday because I'm worse. And let me explain that. I'm learning to deal with not having everything packaged in suitcase. I'm learning to show up as, a collaborator. And I'm learning, not that, we're all inherently good at collaboration, but I mean, you have this ownership of everything you do, and you want it to be the best, and you want to put it out there, and you want to shoulder everything. And I'm learning that I can show up in my mind worse, right, than this whatever picture is in my head that I need to show up like with this perfection. And ultimately I'm better for it. The ideas flow better. The work gets stronger. My mental health is much higher and better than it would have been. So definitely by being okay, showing up as is, it has been big for me.
What's the reminder, or at least kind of the trigger, that allows you, when you start to kind of get over your skis too much and you're thinking, I'm trying too hard to show up, what really dials you back and, like you said earlier, it kind of pulls the throttle slightly back to, reset?
For me, it's definitely stagnation. I start to get stagnant. It's like when you start overcomplicating things, right? And you're like, okay, let's take a knee, like you said earlier, tactical pause. Like, what needs to happen now? What needs to happen right after? In the simplest way, what are we trying to accomplish? Same thing with like, why are things not flowing? Why am I frustrated? Why is this cool? You know what? It's time for me to stand up, like reassess, take a walk, whatever I need to do, and be okay looking around and being like, this is where I'm at. What do we think here? And then 30 seconds, maybe talking to someone, a break, or just going back to it later, like that's okay. But like taking off that pressure to get it to the finish line or whatever you want to call it, like, because most work is never finished. It's only abandoned, right? But getting it to wherever that goal is in your head, it's okay to not do that, right? We get so crazy as military members with deadlines and objectives, and we need to give ourselves a little more grace and understand that for the most part, it's a process.
Frankie, I can't think of a better way to kind of close out the podcast than with that, and talking about, looking at the process and not being so target fixated. Thank you so much for sharing your strategies and your methods and your ideas today. But I really want to know, and have people that are curious, learn more about brain strategy. Where can they go to find you, talk to you, reach out, connect?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean this and not in any type of empty way, very sincerely. If there's anyone listening and they're curious about strategy or creative space or anything, please, definitely, I'll give you my LinkedIn right after this. Please attach it. LinkedIn is great. Yeah, I would say LinkedIn. This way we can keep it funneled pretty much. Because if I send someone to my website or to Siegel+Gale, it gets weird. So just we'll do LinkedIn.
I'll make sure we link the your LinkedIn into the show notes. Frankie, again, thank you so much for sharing the time with us, allowing me to deep dive again in your brain. I always enjoy that. And most importantly, thanks for having me.
I don't know what you've been told, Sixers, but the lawyers would like us to remind you that the views, opinions, and comments expressed on the Got Your Six podcast are solely those of the hosts or guests, to include current and previous Department of Defense employees, and should in no way be considered the opinions of or endorsements on behalf of the Department of Defense or any of its components, divisions, contractors, or other current and previous staff members.